The morning air outside Fort Halstead was cold and sharp, the kind that crept into old bones and reminded a man of every winter he had ever survived. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the massive steel gates in pale gold. Guards rotated shifts, boots striking concrete in a rhythm as familiar as breathing. At T precisely 0700 hours, an old man approached the gate. He walked slowly, not weak, but measured. His back was straight, straighter than many men half his age. He wore a faded brown jacket, neatly pressed, with a small row of ribbons pinned over his heart. They were old ribbons, colors muted by time, but meticulously aligned. On his head sat a worn service cap, its emblem polished by decades of careful hands. His name was Elias Rowan. But no one at the gate knew that. The young private on duty barely glanced up from his tablet. "Sir, this is a restricted installation," he said flatly. "Visiting hours are on Sundays only." ID. Elias reached into his coat slowly and produced a weathered leather wallet. Inside was an old military ID, edges frayed, photo black and white. The private frowned. "This expires, sir. By like 40 years." "I am aware," Elias replied calmly. His voice was steady, deep, the kind that carried authority without raising volume. "I'm here for the memorial." The private sighed and waved over his sergeant, a man in his late 20s with a sharp haircut and sharper impatience. "What's the problem?" the sergeant asked. "Old guy says he's here for a memorial," the private replied. "No valid ID." The sergeant looked Elias up and down. The ribbons caught his eye. "You a vet?" he asked. "Yes." "What unit?" Elias paused for half a second. "Several." The sergeant scoffed. "That's not an answer." "I served where I was sent," Elias said that a couple of other guards glanced over. One smirked. "Look, sir," the sergeant said, crossing his arms. "We get people like you all the time. Old men with stories. This base is active. High clearance. You can't just walk in." Elias nodded slowly. "I understand protocol." "Good," the sergeant said. "Then you understand you need to leave." For a moment, Elias didn't move. His eyes drifted past the gate toward the parade grounds beyond, where flags hung motionless in the early morning stillness. "I've buried men here," he said quietly. The sergeant rolled his eyes. "Sir, I stood on this soil before this gate existed," Elias continued. "Before you were born. Before your father was born." One of the guards laughed under his breath. "Sure you did." Elias finally turned his gaze back to them. There was no anger in his eyes, only something heavier. Memory. "I received an invitation," he said. "The Honor Guard ceremony. Fallen Operations Group." The sergeant's expression hardened. "That ceremony is closed. Families only. Generals only." Elias reached back into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope. Thick paper. Official seal. The sergeant took it, glanced once, then frowned again. "This doesn't mean anything. Anyone can fake this." Elias nodded. "Then call in." The sergeant hesitated. Something in the old man's posture unsettled him. But pride pushed him forward. "I don't have time for this," he snapped. "Sir, step away from the gate." Elias took one slow step back. Then another. He stopped, adjusted his cap, and waited. The guards resumed their routine, whispering among themselves. "Probably some washed-up relic," one muttered. "Thinks a couple ribbons gets him special treatment," said another. They didn't notice the black sedans approaching AT first. It was just a low hum. Then the sound of engines synchronized, controlled. 3 vehicles rolled to a stop near the gate. Doors opened in unison. Out stepped officers. Not just officers, command level. Dress uniforms. Perfect posture. The chatter died instantly that a colonel adjusted his gloves and scanned the area. Then he saw Elias. The color drained from his face. He snapped to attention so fast it startled everyone. "Stand to attention," the colonel barked. The guards froze, confused, scrambling into formation. The colonel marched forward, boots striking the pavement like thunder. He stopped directly in front of Elias Rowan. And then he saluted, not casually, not quickly. It was a full, formal honor guard salute. The other officers followed suit. The entire gate area went silent. The young private's mouth fell open. The sergeant's knees nearly buckled. Elias returned the salute slowly, precisely, with a steadiness that spoke of a lifetime of discipline. "At ease, sir," the colonel said, his voice trembling with respect. We didn't know you were coming." Elias smiled faintly. "I rarely announce myself." The colonel turned sharply toward the guards, his eyes like steel. "Do you have any idea," he said slowly, "who you just dismissed?" No one answered. "That man," the colonel continued, "is Major Elias Rowan, retired. Founding operator of the Fallen Operations Group. Medal of Valor recipient. The reason this base exists." Silence crashed down like a physical weight. The sergeant swallowed hard. "Sir, you questioned his right to enter?" The colonel snapped. "Yes, sir." "You mocked him." The sergeant said nothing. The colonel turned back to Elias. "Sir, the honor guard is assembled. They requested, no, insisted, you be present." Elias nodded once. "Then let's not keep them waiting." As the gates opened wide, every soldier within view snapped to attention. Elias Rowan walked through, the same slow, steady pace. Behind him, the guards stood frozen, faces pale, hearts pounding, as they realized the truth. They hadn't stopped an old man. They had stopped a legend. As Elias Rowan stepped fully inside the gates of Fort Halstead, the world around him seemed to fold backward in time. The sharp smell of polished stone, the echo of boots on concrete, the flag snapping faintly in a breeze, it was all painfully familiar. Rows of soldiers lined the pathway now, words spreading faster than any official announcement. Some whispered his name after hearing it from officers. Others didn't know who he was, only that every ranking officer they'd ever feared stood straighter than steel in his presence. The sergeant who had dismissed him earlier stood rigid near the gate, face burning. He wanted to disappear. Every second replayed in his head. The scoff, the crossed arms, the careless words. Elias did not look back. Inside the central courtyard, the honor guard waited. They were flawless. White gloves, polished rifles, medals catching the sunlight. These were the best of the best, chosen not for show, but for meaning. The moment Elias appeared, the commander of the honor guard raised his sword. "Present." RMS. Steel and discipline moved as one. Rifles snapped up, boots locked into place. Every head turned toward the old man walking alone. The silence was absolute. Elias stopped before the memorial wall, a massive slab of black stone carved with hundreds of names. He removed his cap slowly, holding it over his heart. Some of the names were familiar. Too familiar, he reached out and touched one. Lucas Rowan. His son, a sharp breath escaped Elias' chest, but he did not cry. He had shed those tears long ago, alone, in places no one would ever see. Behind him, a young lieutenant whispered to the colonel, "Sir, is it true?" The colonel nodded once. He trained half the doctrine we still use. He led missions that don't officially exist. And he buried more teammates than anyone should. The ceremony began. A slow drumbeat echoed across the courtyard. Each beat struck Elias like a heartbeat. Steady, deliberate, unforgiving. The narrator's voice rang out. "Today we honor the Fallen Operations Group. Warriors who stood when others could not, who moved when others froze, who gave everything, even when no one would ever know their names." Elias stood, unmoving. As wreaths were laid. The honor guard fired a ceremonial volley. The crack of rifles echoed into the sky. For a split second, Elias wasn't at Fort Halstead. He was back in the desert, back in the jungle, back in the snow-covered mountains where radios failed and extraction never came. He remembered shouting orders into chaos. He remembered dragging wounded men through fire. He remembered Lucas, young, stubborn, fearless, smiling before a mission and saying, "Don't worry, Dad. I've got point." The bugle sounded. Taps. Every soldier felt it in their chest. Some swallowed hard. Some blinked fast. A few didn't hide the tears. When the final note faded, the commander stepped forward. "Major Elias Rowan," he said loudly. "On behalf of the United States Armed Forces, we thank you." Elias shook his head gently. "No," he said. "You thank them." He turned back to the wall. After the ceremony, officers approached one by one. Generals, colonels, leaders who had read about Elias Rowan in classified briefings and spoken his name with reverence. Every single one saluted. Elias returned each salute with quiet precision. Finally, the colonel from the gate approached hesitantly. "Sir," he said, "permission to speak freely." "Granted. We failed you today," the colonel said. "Our men failed you." Elias studied him for a long moment. "No," he said calmly. "They followed procedure. That matters." The colonel exhaled in relief, until Elias continued. "But respect," Elias said, "is not in the manual. That has to be taught." The colonel nodded. "It will be, sir." As Elias prepared to leave, the young private who had first stopped and broke formation and stepped forward, voice shaking. "Sir, I am sorry." Elias looked at him. Really looked at him. "You did your job," Elias said. "Just remember, sometimes the uniform fades before the service does." The private nodded, eyes wet. "Yes, sir." When Elias reached the gate again, the entire guard unit snapped to attention without being told. The sergeant who had dismissed him stepped forward and saluted so sharply his arm trembled. Elias returned it. The black sedans waited, engines humming. Before getting in, Elias turned once more toward the base. "Take care of them," he said quietly. "The ones still standing." "We will, sir," the colonel replied. As the vehicles drove away, silence returned to Fort Halstead. But something had changed. The guards would never forget that morning. They would remember how easily they dismissed an old man, and how the honor guard saluted first.